Alright, what is up guys? Welcome back to another Path of Exile 2 video here. First off, if you don't mind hitting that subscribe button, really appreciate it, helps me out. Today we are going to be just discussing a lot of the announcements that we got yesterday in the 4-hour plus live stream. A lot of content to sift through here. Today I'm going to be just covering everything that I think was of note when you're first getting into the game. I'll make a couple separate videos when looking at more specific things, specific systems like Endgame, Ascendancy classes, etc. But what I'm going to cover today is just kind of everything that I picked up out of that 4-hour live stream to kind of give you like a TLDR version of it if you just want to get the high notes and kind of don't have time to maybe watch through the whole Q&A session, because there was a lot of information that we did get in that Q&A that was not in the 1 hour 20-ish minute video that currently is playing while I'm recording this. So it's gonna be kind of mixed up a little bit, so I apologize for that, but I just wanted to get it all together and get it out there. So try and keep it all sort of categorized the same, but with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it. So first off, big things that we'll be getting is main content. So we'll have the game acts 1 through 3, and then until they release the remaining 3 acts, they're going to have a cruel difficulty. So we'll play act 1 through 3, go into cruel difficulty, play act 1 through 3 again. That'll get us to about level 65, and then that's when we're going to jump into the end game. And the end game, they said that they shifted gears about 12 months ago. My take on it is that they probably saw what happened with Diablo 4 and its lack of end game, so they even kind of mentioned this, not specifically calling anyone out, but just that there's been some games that have come out with great campaign, really good story, and a lack of end game, and then they lose their player base fairly quickly. And to me, that sounds almost exactly like what happened with Diablo 4. So they decided to, hey, instead of finishing the rest of the campaign, we want to focus on the end game and have a very robust end game, because to a lot of people, the end game is like where the game actually starts. So just because you have a really fun campaign, if you don't have any in-game content to do after that campaign, like you don't have anything to test your character on, or to like continue to progress your character and challenge you. So they shifted their focus to the end game about 12 months ago. And like I said, I'll make a separate video on the end game, but just a couple of basic things. So there are multiple in-game systems, like 5 or 6 different systems. They each have their own like passive tree, more or less, so you don't have to spec into one tree and kind of pick what content you want to focus on. As you progress the content, you will get points for those specific separate trees and be able to upgrade them. They each have their own like modifier to the level, so like you can do +1, +2, +3, +4, with +4 being the highest version, and fighting those pinnacle bosses at that higher tier is going to give you access to different loot tables at each tier, higher item quality. And a big change that they mentioned is that a lot of times when we hear item quality in a Path of Exile 1 context, we're just thinking, okay, so there's going to be a lot more like yellow and blue items. No, actually what item quality does now is it affects how good the items that drop are. So you're going to be getting better rares dropping. It seems like they've really decreased the amount of loot that drops. And then a couple other things with the endgame. So the endgame map system now is a little more akin to like Delve in a way, because it is an infinitely expanding map and it spreads into all directions. A couple other big things. So only 25% of maps have a boss in it, and this let them really like turn up the difficulty on those bosses, because you're not having to fight them every single map. So when you do, and you'll know which map has a boss in it, so you can choose to challenge the boss or avoid the bosses, and they have their own tree as well for you know, boss content, boss killing content. And just because 25% have a boss, it doesn't mean that like you'll do 4 maps and fight 1 boss. You know, you could find the maps that have the bosses in it and travel to those areas to challenge those bosses, or you know, you can avoid them if you prefer to. But yeah, so much more challenging, much more rewarding boss fights in the map. Instead of being called maps now, the items are called waystones, and if you die in the map, you can no longer run that map, and you'll have to, like, it'll be like a red area and kind of like block your progression down that path, so you'll have to find like an alternate route to go around it, or possibly turn back and travel in a different way. It'll be interesting to see exactly how that works, because let's say like you die on every map, that gives you like a forward progression. What, you know, my curiosity was asking, well, what happens then? Are you just kind of like, I mean, there has to be something to you know, allow you to continue to progress, I would assume, but they didn't really answer that question. It wasn't a question I saw come up, so I'm curious to see how that will work. In the maps, we still have 6 portals, but like I said, if you die, that ends the map for you. So you still have 6 portals to take out your gear and to utilize for like multiplayer sessions, but you cannot be revived in the map even if you're playing multiplayer. So they didn't want that to be sort of like, if you have a challenging map, like, oh, I'm afraid to run this map, I can't do it unless I have like a party with me to constantly revive me. So they just wanted that to not be an issue, so that's the reason for that, they said. And let's go ahead, and now that we've kind of discussed sort of the basic in-game stuff, let's talk about some of the more broad changes that they have implemented that are going to be different from PoE 1 to PoE 2. So, like I said, game will be Act 1 through 3 plus cruel difficulty. We'll have 6 classes available, each with 2 ascendancies starting out. Ultimately, there will be a total of 12 classes with 3 ascendancies each. Those 6 classes will be Monk, Warrior, Ranger, Mercenary, Witch, and Sorceress. They've fully implemented WASD move for keyboard. You can still play click to move, full cross-play, full cross-progression, so that is awesome. They have put out the packs now, so you can gain access. It's $30 for the basic pack to gain entry, or if you've spent a total of $480 over the course of your PoE 1 account, you'll also receive access for free. So those are available now if you want to check them out and purchase them ahead of time. Uncut gems, so these drop and you use them to either level up a current gem or to cut a new one. So let's say you get a level 7 uncut gem, you can utilize that to upgrade a current gem you have that's below level 7, or you can cut a new gem, new skill gem to level 7. And same thing for support gems. So huge change with support gems. You can only have one support gem of its type per character. So for example, you have like multiple projectiles. You can only have one multiple projectile support gem through all your skills per character. So they said, you know, there's not really a logical reason behind it. Like, there's no in-game explanation as to why, but that they really like the way that this affects, you know, the decisions you make, the, you know, choices you have to make, and how it it impacts and like expands the builds that are there. So we'll have to be much more strategic in how we pick support gems for our abilities and our characters, because we're limited to one per character. Also, another thing I noticed in the video, so jeweler orbs, they are the currency that will add sockets to your skill gems. Each skill gem can get up to a 6 link, and it looks like there's different tiers of jeweler orbs, because in the video they show a quote-unquote perfect jeweler orb, and the description for that was adds a socket to a skill gem with 4 sockets. So I'm assuming that there will be, like, you know, flawed, or, you know, different tiers, like chipped, flawed, normal, you know, flawless, perfect maybe, and those give you like the 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, something like that is what I'm assuming. There are trigger games or trigger jewels in the game, trigger gems, excuse me. The example they show is a cast on ignite gem, and you know, as you ignite enemies, once the tooltip fully fills up, it'll cast a spell. So there are, moving on into a couple other categories. So shields. Shields now block all damage from the front, including spells. But caveat to this, you have to raise your shield in order to block the damage, and it does significantly slow down your move speed. And you also have a stun meter that fills up, and when that stun meter fills up, if you don't drop your shield, then you are going to basically have your stance broken, and you'll be vulnerable for it looks like quite a bit of time for the monsters to just wail on you. So you have to be kind of strategic with that. There is also only 1 life flask and 1 mana flask slot, so you cannot switch between like 2 life or 2 mana. You only have 1 life and 1 mana, so very limited in what you can do with that. They did say that there might be like a unique flask that kind of gives you like build choices if you don't need the mana flask, like if you've basically like solved your mana and you have no need for the mana flask. There are new items called charms, and there's like a charm slot that you get up to 3 based off of like if you've upgraded your belt. And what these kind of do is those previous flask affixes that would give you immunity to bleed, freeze, etc. That's how you will now defend yourself against these mechanics. So like the charm will say, upon being frozen, automatically grants you immunity to freeze for X amount of seconds. So that is interesting. They also recharge from kills, same way that your flasks do. They did mention, now with only having 1 flask, like it is going to be a much more substantial or difficult choice to make. Like, do I want instant recovery at a lower amount, or do I want like that much higher recovery amount? So they said you get about 6 or 7 uses per flask, and this choice was made basically because they like the piano keyboard mechanic was like you had to be very adept to like properly utilize your flasks, and it was just like unnecessary complexity, they felt like. So that was the reason for that change. There is a new resource called Spirit, and it's kind of very similar to Reservation. You can see it along the mana flask. It's those, or the mana circle, bubble, whatever you want to call it, mana pool. It's those white bars around the edge of it. That is your Spirit. So it is used for persistent skills, and there are like persistent gems that drop to cut these skills from, and that's going to be like your aura skills, your permanent minion skills, like your Arctic armor, etc. Basically anything that reserved mana in PoE 1, it seems like those are going to function off of your spirit. And it'll be interesting to see if there are other spirit uses. You can increase your spirit from items, so I'm assuming that, you know, we'll also probably be able to increase it from the passive tree, but we'll have to wait and kind of see. So the permanent minions, they are revived automatically, and they also have like an active ability, like command ability, that you can have them do. So that's interesting. We'll have to, you know, get some play time with that to really see what it feels like. It looks like there's also other minions that you can summon that maybe are not permanent, that just have, like, you know, use a corpse, like a summon skeleton type thing. Talking about ascendancies, so there are multiple ways to ascend now. There are two ways currently that we'll get in early access, with the third coming later, they said, in Act 4. The two that we'll have now, basically, one is very similar to Sanctum from PoE 1, where it's like, you know, a roguelike dungeon where you have, you know, telegraphed attacks that you need to avoid with like an honor system, and if your honor system fills up, like, it ends the run for you. You pick the rooms you go into. Some rooms have traps. You can avoid those rooms if you want to not have to deal with traps, or if you just don't like the Sanctum mechanic, and I forget what they call it in early access, you can instead do like the Trial Master version of it, which it's much more just like survive and kill monsters while dealing with like the Trial Master mechanics. There are no traps, they said, in that version of it. And then both of those two systems have their own like end game as well. So you can, at the end game, progress through those, and they can be very rewarding. They, you know, with their own pinnacle boss at the end of each of those things. So respecking, we can now respec passives from gold, similar to what they added into Settlers of Kalgur. So that, I think, is a really good change. Gold is not tradable, so gold is, they said, more like a representation of your total playtime, and its main uses are going to be, you know, purchasing from vendors, or, you know, you gain it from selling to vendors, using on the currency exchange to mass exchange currency between players. There will be a gold fee, and that's very similar or exactly the same as Settlers of Kalgur mechanic as well. And then attribute nodes, instead of being locked to like +10 of whichever attribute based on your location on the tree, more or less, you now can pick which attribute you want from those nodes, and instead they give you +5 attribute. You can also change those, like if you want to change it from strength to dex, for half the gold cost of a normal respec. So it's nice that they kind of realize that we may need to change those more frequently, and so we get to do that at a gold discount. They did show a couple of keystone passives, two that, you know, I thought were noteworthy, just because one is new and like huge for me, especially because it was one of my favorite barbarian Diablo 2 mechanics. So they've added in a it's called Giant's Blood. You can wield two-handed axes, maces, or swords in one hand, but it doubles the attribute requirement for the weapon. So you could, for example, dual wield, you know, two-handed weapons, or use a two-handed weapon in one hand and a shield. So that is awesome, fantastic. They also showed Mind Over Matter, so that gives you all damage goes to your mana before life, but 50% reduced mana regen. So I could see that being really strong on like a monk build where they get instant mana leech. I could definitely see that being like a really strong build, because they get instant mana leech, and it also applies to their energy shield leech. And I thought that it was instant as well. I'd have to go back and double check though. But I can see that being really strong. So weapon swap. You can now like set skills to be cast automatically between 2 different weapon sets. So if you want to use like a fire and lightning staff and swap between them as you cast spells, or let's say like they also mentioned a one-hander shield combo and then a two-hander weapon, so like use the shield for defensively and then swap to the two-hander to do big damage. You can also get your swap between like your weapon skill sets, so you get additional skill points that you can assign to the different like weapon slots, so you can fully, you know, take advantage of those 2 weapon slots. So that's cool. Most of those come from these optional encounters that if you open up the map, you can see all the different optional encounters where they are on the map. They said, you know, generally you'll find out about them from NPC dialogue, but since most people kind of like skip NPC dialogue, you may just see them appear on your map and not really know where you got it, or it could just be from entering an area. But basically, you know, most of them you're going to find as you play through the game. They said there may be a couple like secret ones or harder to find ones, so it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. Those optional encounters, that their suggestion is like if you run into a brick wall and like you can't progress past a boss, like look at the optional encounters nearby and go do those to get stronger, because they're going to give you either like permanent buffs, some give you more spirit, some give you permanent elemental resists. Those were the ones that they kind of showcased, so interesting to see what other buffs you might get. Or they might drop like good items, so it sounds like they may sort of have like a fixed drop, similar kind of to like what we would get in Diablo 2 from certain unique enemies that had like a fixed drop. So they said, you know, this guy might drop like really good caster, early game caster items, so will be definitely good to like learn what those drops are for when we're playing new leagues, new characters. It'll definitely sound like help you progress through your initial playthrough, like on a new league or once the game comes out. Talking about a little more about items and currency. So huge changes here to items and currency. There are no more scouring orbs, so they're just completely gone. And one thing this does is it makes the base items much more valuable. And in the Q&A, they kind of talked about if players aren't picking up items in Act 1 and like transmuting, augmenting, regaling, and then exalting the item multiple times, then they haven't done it right. So they said that, you know, I think something like 18 times the drop rate before they felt like it was, you know, in the place that they wanted it to be, to where people were like finding items in Act 1 and fully, you know, adding like multiple mods to it with exalted orbs. So exalted orbs are very plentiful. Ziggy D said in his playthrough he had like 7 or 8 of them by the end of Act 1. And so they wanted to, they said, democratize crafting. So as we pick up items, they want us like fully upgrading them constantly. And they, let me take a drink. So they really want that everybody to kind of participate in the crafting, and that's going to be your main source of gear, is picking up the base item and then crafting through that system. So a lot to touch on here. So they kind of speculated, Ziggy D and the developer, you know, that exalted orbs may be kind of more valued as like a chaos orb because of how plentiful they are, and then chaos orbs may become more like the new exalted orb, so to speak, in terms of like the economy, but we'll have to really wait and see. But if you want, you can trade blue items for transmutation shards, and you can trade rare items for regal shards, so you can build up like a good amount of transmute and regals. And they wanted the crafting to be currency to be much more plentiful, so everybody would feel comfortable utilizing it regularly throughout the campaign. So I am a huge fan of that change. I think it's awesome. Like one of my gripes with PoE 1 is some of the currency was so rare that like only the top like maybe 1% or less of players would even ever get the chance to use it, or even like participate in the crafting system. So I think that that is an awesome change, and it's going to make the campaign and the gearing much more interesting. So they also wanted like the dropped items to be much more important aspect of the game. Like in PoE 1, we turn on the loot filter and filter out like 99.9% of the items. It sounds like that's not going to be the case in this. Like they said, when you kill a boss, if you're not picking up every item that the boss drops, then there's a problem. Like they did something wrong if you're not picking it up, because they should be good items. So a change to item quality in the game. In PoE 1, we're used to hearing item quality and just thinking, oh great, like more yellow, more blue items, just like lots more of them, without really any true like quality of items. Like it's just going to be a lot of trash yellows and blues. Item quality now actually affects how good the item is that drops, so that is also a very good warranted change, I believe. And they kind of said, so like once you build up a good stockpile of like regals and transmutation orbs, you'll probably then want to shift to selling your items for gold. Gear also has sockets now, so 1 per item, except on 2-handers and chests. Those can have 2 sockets. You can gain +1 socket from corruption from a Veil Orb. It sounds like Veil Orbs are also better now. They don't have as high of a chance to just completely brick the item, so it could it could add a socket. It could re-roll some of the mods, but not all of them. So you could have, like, they gave an example, like an item with really good prefix mods but not so good suffix mods. You could veil it, and it could potentially just like re-roll the bad suffix mods, and you could potentially come out with like a better version of the item instead of re-rolling everything and bricking it. The corruption also no longer removes the implicit mod, so that is also a buff to the Veil Orb. So you can basically, most of the time, you're gonna get something out of the corruption versus just completely bricking the item the overwhelming majority of the time. So that was really nice to hear. The sockets, they're gonna be for a new type of item, and they are gonna give you like sort of what you would get from the crafting bench. Like if you have a problem, like, hey, I need 10% more like cold resistance, you can put the rune in to give yourself like a little bit more resistance. There's also going to be, I think they were called soul stones or something like that, which those are going to be the more rare like in-game version of the socketable items that'll give you much more stats than just like a little bit of this or a little bit of that. Like it'll have multiple mods with much more powerful buffs. And there are you can salvage the items with sockets to gain Artificer Orb shards, and then once you get enough of those, you will get an Artificer's Orb, which allows you to socket your item up to the maximum number of sockets. And same thing for like whetstones and armor shards, etc. You can salvage quality items to get those shards. And that is pretty much all the stuff I wanted to kind of cover so far, like in terms of the core game that we're getting. I will make some more like detailed videos on like more specific aspects of the game, like Endgame, ascendancies, like I said. We'll probably look more detailed at other things like the gems, the ascendancy classes and ways to ascend. So if you guys are looking forward to PoE 2 as much as I am and enjoy PoE 2 content, please hit that subscribe button. Really appreciate it. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for watching. And remember to give them the D.